Hello, I'm Miranda Braun, and I'm the founder and the president of the Miranda Braun Diversity Leadership Foundation. I'm also the host and the producer for the D.A.R.E podcast. This D.A.R.E podcast is all about having a successful mindset, and we have a new partnership with Citi AM, where we're going to be interviewing some of the most successful mindsets in the City of London. Now, for those of you who might be wondering, well, what does the D.A.R.E podcast stand for? D.A.R.E is a model that I've been using throughout my success mindset coaching. D stands for having the determination to dream bigger. A is taking the appropriate action. R is having the resilience, and also the self-reassessment in terms of how to look at your skill sets. And the E is having that positive energy to make your dreams come true. So if you would like to be inspired and learn how to develop a successful mindset, you need to be tuning in to our podcast episodes where we will be interviewing some of the most successful mindsets in the City of London. And it all starts right here, right now. So stay tuned. It's really going to be fun. And there's going to be lots of laughter and lots of honest, real talk. So don't forget to tune in, follow and subscribe. Thank you. And hello, it's an absolute pleasure to have you here on the D.A.R.E podcast. And for those that don't know, that you are our first guest with a very special partnership with Citi AM. And for those that don't know, D.A.R.E stands for having the determination, having the right action, the resilience and the appropriate energy to have positive results. And that's what this model and this platform is all about. It's a successful mindset podcast. And I thought you would be the perfect person to kickstart this partnership that I've got now with Citi AM and the D.A.R.E podcast. And I really want to start from the beginning. I mean, why don't you introduce yourself to our audience? And I'm calling you Anne because I want you to introduce your full name, what you're doing at the moment, because we were having a chat before we actually started recording, and your biography. You have done so much, but why don't we start with who you are and what you are doing at the moment, and then we can go back to what you've done.
Well, it's lovely to be here, Miranda, and I feel very honoured to be your first guest. I'm in my plural career right now. Yeah. So I'm chairing a number of companies. I chair Cab Payments, which owns Crown Agents Bank. I chair TMF, which is a global services company owned by CVC and ADIA. I also chair Financial Alliance for Women, and I chair a mentorship organisation called Moving Ahead. I also sit on a board for Lightrock, which is an impact investing board, which is super interesting. Yeah. So I'm doing a range of things, and I'm absolutely loving this stage of my career.
I love that. And I know I got to know about you when you were global chair of the 30% Club. That's how I got to know you. Mm-hmm. And for those that don't know, the 30% Club, it was founded by Dame Helena Morrissey, who I'm going to get on this podcast as well. And that was all about getting 30% of women in the boardroom. We've now exceeded that, and it's 40% plus.
It is about 42% in the FTSE, I think. Yeah,
that's right.
Yeah.
And you and I met. I think we met for the first time last year when I was speaking we were both speaking at an event, and you were moderating the conference, and you very kindly introduced me when I was talking about diversity. But you have done so much, but I want to start right from the beginning. I want to go back to your childhood. Where did you grow up, and what were you like as a child? And did you have an aspiration to have this amazing financial career?
Oh, yes. I thought about it from the age of 2, naturally.
As we all have.
I grew up in the northeast of England. You can probably hear that in my accent, which I've never tried to lose.
That's good.
So I was born in Newcastle, and I actually grew up in a mining village. And I had a super childhood. We lived in council housing. Many people in the northeast did at the time. My father was a shoemaker. And at one stage, I think my mother sold Tupperware, and there were 3 children. And I used to love at that stage being in pantomime and dancing and, doing a lot of drama. And I actually think having that kind of childhood set me up for the business world because I always loved performing and speaking and presenting myself from a very young age. But I'm quite scientific by nature, and I went to university to do pure mathematics. So I think that really had an influence on who I turned out to be.
And you also shared that you were an engineer before you entered banking, and you entered banking in your 30s. So I think this is a wonderful example in terms of you don't have to continue with the career that you chose when you were 21. You can change. I mean, I've changed my career so many times. Started as a banker, I was a hedge fund sales trader, then I was a lawyer. Now, like you, I've got a portfolio board career and I'm an advisor. I've launched a charity. There's so many different things that you can do. But tell me about the route in terms of what made you become an engineer, and why did you make the transition, and how did you make the transition into banking?
Well, I mean, the engineering side, I kind of fell into that because I went to Newcastle University to do my master's, and I have a master's in medical statistics. And the engineering research station owned by British Gas in Killingworth, which is quite near Newcastle, rang up the university and said, is there anyone here who could come and design experiments for physicists and chemists and engineers? And they sent me along for the interview. And I got the job. But when I actually joined, I realized I liked the engineering side. And actually, after a few years as a research scientist, I saw that the cutting end of the business was actually offshore engineering. So I rang the guy up in London who managed all of that for British Gas and said, I'd love to be an offshore engineer. And he said, really? He said, you have to escape underwater from sunken helicopters as part of the training. And I went, oh, like Top Gun, that must be like the best part. So he said, well, in that case, you better hop on the train from Newcastle and come and see me in Marble Arch. And I ended up being the first woman on the oil and gas rigs here in Britain.
That.
So
that is amazing.
Yeah. So I mean, it was quite a exciting and fun career, but also British Gas was privatising. I met Margaret Thatcher, by the way, when I was about 22.
Oh, wow. How did you meet Margaret Thatcher? How did that come about?
Well, she came to the research station and I was the only woman engineer there. But there was a typing pool and, actually they painted the bathrooms for her coming. So I was a great recipient. Me and the typing pool were great recipients of that. And I was quite socialist when I was younger, not surprising, being brought up in the Northeast. Yeah. And I thought, I'm not going to like this woman. But actually, she was amazing, very charismatic. When you talked to her, you felt you were the only person in the room. But I guess, that was my naivety as a 22-year-old, not realizing that very prominent politicians are probably pretty charismatic people, whether you agree with their politics or you don't,
Very, very true. So tell me about your career journey. So you then, you started in oil and gas. Mm-hmm. How did you make that transition to go into banking?
Well, as I said, British Gas was privatising, and I could see that the people at the top of the company weren't the engineers, they were the financy types.
Yes.
And I thought, gosh, I'm in the wrong job, in order to get to the top of a company. Yeah. So I was thinking, maybe I should go and do an MBA. I was sort of just turned 30 then. And then Citibank advertised in the Sunday Times and they said they wanted to recruit people with management experience. By then, I was managing a team of 50 engineers in my late 20s.
Wow.
And so they wanted to recruit people and retrain them as investment bankers, and that's how I joined the bank.
That is amazing.
Yeah.
And I think for anyone who's listening to this podcast, I think that's a really good example in terms of just going for it and applying. In terms of how I got into investment banking, I started investment banking when I was a teenager.
Right.
And it was through, once again, seeing an advert in a newspaper, because that's how jobs were advertised back then. I started in the 90s. I was one of the first women of colour on the trading floor. Uh-huh. When did you start Citigroup?
I joined in 87 and three weeks later it was Black Monday and it was just like chaos and we're unwinding swap portfolios and everything, and 20 years later I end up being the CEO of Lehman Holdings on behalf of Alvarez and Marsal here.
Yes.
And so it was deja vu. But I mean, so how did you join? You joined as a teenager.
Yes.
So you didn't go to university right away. You joined.
Yeah, that's correct. So I joined as an A-level trainee.
Right.
And I then, when I was 20, I then realised actually the way the world is moving, I needed a degree. So I ended up going in the evenings, got a degree, then I got a master's, got an MBA. Because I think also in the 90s, approaching the early 2000s, it was all about having an MBA. I knew I wanted to have management experience. So I then progressed onto that. I always wanted to be a lawyer. And I'm going to share that in my own episode, but I wanted to be a lawyer and I thought I've got to tick that box. So that's why I think it's so important to just be open to opportunities, because you also change as a person. And I think people might not realise that, but who you are at 21 is going to be very different to who you are at 31, 41 and 51.
Yeah, and who you are in your 60s like me.
Yes, 100%.
Yeah.
So...
But, you know, it's interesting that you say you're the first woman of colour on the trading floor.
One of the,
but also... You know, you were probably one of the first women. I mean, there aren't very many women on the trading floor. You know, even in my time, back in 87, there were, very few.
Definitely. But, I mean, this podcast is all about having a successful mindset. And you clearly have a successful mindset. You know, whatever you put your mind to, you have gone out and achieved that. And you've done that very successfully. What advice would you give to someone listening to this who might want to actually develop a successful mindset and have some tips around that? And it could be success tips in terms of the D.A.R.E model, or it could be something beyond that. Because it's clearly working for you, Anne.
It has worked for me. I've had a very long career, Miranda. Look, I do think that you shouldn't wait to be asked to do things. I mean, that is actually a trait that's very common among women. Oh, if I work hard, somebody will recognize me and then they'll promote me. Yeah. No, life doesn't work that way. And if there's something out there that you see, I think you should ask. Ask for the opportunity. When I rang the head of offshore engineering in British Gas, I'd never met him in my life. I looked him up in the phone book and I thought, what's the worst that he can do? I mean, he could put the phone down on me. And I've always had that thought in my career that if I want to do something and I want to make a change, what is it that I want to achieve and who do I have to ask to help me? Yeah. And I've come across so many people that have helped me. And most of them have been men, because it was always men who were above me.
Yeah, who were in those positions of power to actually help. And it's funny. So I mentioned I got to know who you were before we even met when you were global chair of the 30% Club. And one of the things that I've been doing, I mean, through my charity that I launched, the Miranda Braun Diversity Leadership Foundation, we launched the UK's first Black women on boards. But it's all about just creating more diversity. I was a senior visiting fellow, ended last year at Oxford University, and that was on boardroom sustainability, inclusion, and corporate governance. But from a boardroom perspective, what do you think we should be doing more of in order to have the boardroom more sustainable and more inclusive?
I think we've been doing some of the right things, because we started off, say, in the 30% Club with this idea of, let's have a threshold, because above 30%, then you're not a minority. And we saw that when you got above 30%, things started to accelerate. I think we've moved a long way since then, because that was about men and women. And we've moved a long way in Britain, by the way, but not in a lot of different parts in the world. But, it's still single digits in parts of Latin America, the Middle East. There could be like boards that are just completely men. But I think, people are now thinking about diversity in a much broader way. And it's sort of the intersection of all the different things that could make the boardroom strong. And it can be different ethnicities, it can be people with disabilities that would have a different point of view about how you should create your workplace to work for everyone. And I think that has actually come to the fore in recent years, because particularly during COVID, there was a lot of thinking about that and about how much more accessible work was for people. And I'm thinking of, some people that say are on the autistic spectrum found it much easier to work from home because they're not distracted by the lights and the noise in the office and all of the things that are disruptive for them.
And I think so many people found it more productive because you don't have all these meetings and the traveling, and you can just do what you need to do within that work time. So what advice would you give to someone who actually wants to get into the boardroom, who wants to get into a senior position?
Well, first of all, I think you've got to think about what you bring. So a lot of the time when you join a board, it's because you've got a background in something that is a skill set that the board needs.
Yes.
And it's, people think, oh, I want to be on a board. But actually, boards are constructed to look at what business are we in, who should sit on the board of this business, because we need a range of skill sets in order to be able to strategize about it and to guide the management teams in the right direction. So, for example, on the board of CAB payments that I chair, we've got, an ex-CFO. That's usually a really great skill because then you've got somebody who's been C-suite and is actually has the financial background to understand all the board papers, the financials. We've got somebody who's been a head accountant, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Great for dealing with the audit committee, auditors, and so on. My Sid has been, a senior manager of Citibank across Europe. Well, it's a banking business, so she brings just an incredible amount of skill to how to run a bank, how to run across different geographies, and so it's really thinking about individual members of the board and then how they come together as a team to create that strength and that ability to be able to guide the company, and them as individuals. What are their backgrounds? What are their points of view? Because you don't want everyone to agree on a board.
That's exactly it.
And sometimes different backgrounds, they're invisible. For example, my background, I came from quite a poor part of the country. You could say that I sort of moved from, a socially deprived background into, the top of the corporate world.
Yes.
And if you're trying to sort of bring people in from different areas of life, this is important to have a perspective on that.
Definitely. One of the things I want to touch upon is impact investing. And I've just found out today that I'm on the Wise 100, sponsored by NatWest,
well
for
done,
impact
you.
investing, which is great.
And so what is it that you're investing in then?
So it's all about impact investing. It's all about helping others to make a difference with their investing. But I would love you to share with the audience the work that you're doing around impact investing, and maybe start with what is impact investing, and then how can someone who's listening get involved?
Yeah. Well, I mean, my connection is that I sit on the board of Lightrock, and Lightrock is actually a PE company.
And for those that don't know, that's private equity.
Yes, yes. And what they do is they do impact investing all over the world. Their portfolio is several $billion. One of the things that they did was launch a big climate fund last year in Europe. It was, I think it was something like 820 million. It was the biggest one in Europe. Yeah. And what they do is they find companies to invest in that are doing something that really impacts climate change. And they think about impact in three ways. They think about what does it do for people, what does it do for the planet, and what does it do for productivity. And they have a pretty sophisticated framework to measure that and measure the impact of the companies they're investing in. So, for example, in the climate portfolio, they've got companies that build plants that can produce hydrogen. I mean, clean energy. They're investing in companies that have software that can optimize how, say, your data center is working in order to reduce the amount of energy that you're burning. And that's really important because with artificial intelligence, you're using something like 10 times more energy than you were using for just basic computing.
Yes.
And they also, not in the climate portfolio, but in other portfolios, invest in medical robotics. And it's just such an exciting business. And whether it's in Brazil or it's in Africa or it's in India or it's here in the UK or America, they're investing in a whole range of companies. I would actually recommend people to go into the internet and look them up because you would be able to see their portfolio.
That's amazing. And it's funny, so I sit on various boards, but one of the boards I sit on is also related to impact investing, and it's with Schroders and Casno Capital.
Right.
They've got a charity and sustainability funds, and it's all echoing what you're doing, and it's all your PE company, what they're doing, but it's so key, and I think it's so important. And so many global organizations, including banks, they're all focused on how can we make a positive impact, not only on the environment, but also social, the ESG, the environment, the social, the governance. All of that plays a key part in terms of what organizations are doing now. So I think that's great. I want to talk about, so we've clearly worked in male-dominated environments, and you're maybe a decade or so or two ahead of me. But
two for sure.
But I mean, we've got to talk about discrimination, whether it's, from a gender perspective, sexual discrimination, harassment, all of that's taking place at the moment. And we've got the Me Too movement.
Right.
Do you have, and I know this, I'm just organically, this question just came up in my head now. I know I didn't prep you on this one.
You don't need to prep me.
But have you ever experienced anything like that? And if so, how did you handle it?
Oh, yes, of course. Yeah. I mean, you can't have been working
a beautiful 20-something-year-old in a male-dominated environment.
Yes. Look, I don't think it's anything new. And I think, it was probably better in engineering in the sense that I think you're very respected for the skills that you bring. Yeah. Engineers tend to work in teams, and but when you move into investment banking, it's a little bit more, sharp-edged. Yeah. And yes, I mean, you would be absolutely appalled at some of the behavior and the things that are said, 30, 40 years ago.
That used to be the saying.
Yes. Something like that.
Yeah.
But I've always felt that you could rise above it, and that I never really got upset or disturbed by it because everything's in its time, if you know what I mean. Yeah. You can look back and you can sort of be appalled now, but you can say, oh, well, that's anachronistic because now we're in 2024. Yeah. Right. But I think that the modern awareness is good. And I think that we need it in order to progress. But I would also sort of have a balance about it in life because life is challenging.
Yes.
And people are going to have different points of view about who you are and what you can achieve and what they want to see in the business world. Yes. And I think that, you have to have a balance about that as well and not get too wound up about things.
Yes. So where did your ambition come from? We're clearly ambitious. We're clearly driven. Where did your drive and ambition come from?
I think that a lot of ambition is internal. I think it's, it's driven from within.
Yes.
That may be for me because actually I would probably be an introvert. Although, you might think, well, I seem very extrovert, but introvert in the sense of I listen to myself.
Yes.
I actually like time to myself. I read a lot of books and, that comes with being a research background. I'm sure you're the same.
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a lot of drive comes from within.
Yes.
And then I love people. I'm a social animal.
Yes.
And I think that as I see the world, one of the things that I've felt very deeply over the years are there's so many talented people out there,
Yeah.
that don't get the opportunities they deserve.
That's right.
In my time, it was certainly women. I think it's got a bit better for women these days.
Yes.
But you see other people that struggle, and you think it's unfair.
Yeah.
And you want to have a level playing field. There isn't one. So you're constantly trying to think, how do I make sure that I've really been fair and I've brought, the right people to the table, and I've got the right recruitment processes, and I'm asking the right questions, and everybody is. And how can you call people to account who aren't?
Yeah.
And how can you sponsor people to actually, get to where they need to be?
Yes.
Because mentoring's one thing, but sponsoring something completely different.
Absolutely.
If you're very senior and you're sitting inside a company, it should be fairly easy to sponsor people to
That's right.
move around the world.
That's right.
And if you've got a position of influence in say, the public or private sector, I think that you're duty bound to use it to actually help people.
Yeah. And I think you touched upon a key point. It's really important when you are on your journey, whether it's personal or professional, to take time out to reflect and really think about, the journey that you're on. Because I think so many people, I know I was always focused on the next success, and you don't really enjoy the journey. And so the advice I would give to anyone is to try and enjoy that journey and actually take those moments to sit back and reflect in what direction are you going in. Now, what I want to do is actually, you've clearly got a very accomplished success story in terms of your career. And what other goals would you like to achieve? Because you've done a lot, but you're still very young. As far as I'm concerned, I think 60-something, whatever that is the new 40-something.
60's the new 40, yes. Though they tell me that 80's the new 80, which is a bit scary.
No, 80's the new 60. I'm going with that. So what else would you like to achieve?
Well, I would really like to see some of the change that I wanted to happen really happen in the business world. And I don't think that we're there yet. So I'm starting to do things like sponsor scholarships at the universities I went to. I'm sponsoring particularly women doing science and engineering subjects.
Amazing.
and helping them, be successful with their degrees to start with, but then hopefully their careers.
Yes.
So that's something that I've started to really pay a lot more attention to now. I think that, my daughter's 30 now, and she shows me what it's like to work in the working world today. And I think the impact of social media was never there in my time, and it's super strong today.
Yes.
And I think it's really important to talk to people about that and say, look, it's not the be all and end all. Media is important, but you need to sort of be a bit more reflective about your journey and realize that, as you say, there's a lot of time ahead. You're running a marathon. It's not a sprint.
That's it. Yeah.
And really sharing that knowledge with the younger generation and being there for them as they go through this. I think that's really important. And at the moment, I'm not involved in the political side of life here in Britain. I wasn't involved in politics, but I did work as the lead director, non-executive for BEIS, which was Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, the department that had the net zero agenda and so on. Yeah. That was actually broken up last year, so I stepped down from that. I'm thinking at some point I'll go back to actually, a government advisor, perhaps when we get through the next stage.
Yes.
Because there's so much to do with social infrastructure.
Yes.
I think that we need a new social contract for parents, and it was very clear during COVID how much some parents struggled trying to sort of maintain their careers, with their kids at home and so on. But I think things like childcare in Britain is still really expensive.
It is.
And hampering for families that have two careers. So, one of you ends up giving up your career or actually going to part-time. I don't think that should be happening.
No.
I think we should have an environment where everybody can reach their potential, and we really don't today.
Definitely.
So these are things that are on my mind.
Do you know what I've just thought of? So, with my charity, we launch scholarships.
Right.
I would love to launch a scholarship under your name.
Oh, wow. That would
Wouldn't
be
that
really
amazing.
Absolutely.
We literally just launched the scholarship. We launch, every March, but I would love to see what we can do there. Last question before I could talk to you forever, and I know we're going to have coffee or lunch to continue this conversation. But the last question, so this is all about a D.A.R.E podcast, and I've explained what D.A.R.E stands for, but we always end with, what would you dare our audience to do?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I dare the audience to believe in themselves. I mean, you talk about successful mindset.
Yes.
And I think that I heard something on the TV, was it 2 days ago, saying that 1/3 of 18 to 24-year-olds are struggling with some sort of mental, illness or, and I was appalled by that. Yes. I don't know whether that's just got worse during COVID or what it is.
Yes.
But, I would dare people to sort of reflect on this and say, what is it that is going to make me feel happy, fulfilled, and successful?
Yes.
And to try and, change their lives in order to get there, because I just don't want to feel that there's a huge group of people out there that are struggling.
That's right.
Every day.
That's right.
So, yeah, that's my dare.
That's a wonderful way. And I think you've just hit the nail on the head. It's about having a happy, joyful life. So thank you so much for being a guest on our new partnership with Citi AM, which is the D.A.R.E podcast. And I realised I didn't actually start the podcast actually introducing who I am. So people might be thinking, who is she? So for those that don't know and are wondering, I'm Miranda Braun, and I'm the founder and the president for the Miranda Braun Diversity Leadership Foundation, but I'm also the host and the producer for the D.A.R.E podcast. Thank you very much for listening, and do subscribe. We are available on all of your usual podcast platforms, including YouTube. So do follow us, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's been great to be here.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.